Unbroken, healing through storytelling.
Today, my guest is Danielle Falconer. Danielle is 27 and lives in Fife, Scotland. She is currently a primary school teacher and describes it as a wonderful job. She says she is a mama to 3 beautiful babies, her gorgeous girl, Robyn Skye Knox, who will be forever 3, and her beautiful twin boys, Robyn Jr. Skye Knox and River Skye Knox, who were both born on the 4th of December 2020. So welcome, Danielle, to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
That's not a problem. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So the very first question I ask everybody, as the show is called Unbroken, is what does that word unbroken mean to you?
Before, for me, unbroken probably would have meant something that had been broken but was now fixed. After what happened to Robyn, that changed because losing a child, it does, in a sense, break you. But when you think your heart is broken into these millions of pieces, but that will never be fixed. It'll never be back to what it was before because you always have that piece of you missing. So for me, unbroken, it's not about anything being fixed. It's about people have these adverse experiences and situations in their life that are designed, or you could say they're designed to break you and push you to your limits. So to be unbroken from something of the sorts happening, it's about taking that experience and building strength from it and positivity and not being fixed from it, but carrying it with you. It's still always going to be there. There's always going to be a piece of it that niggles at you, but using the strength from it to carry on and continue to do positive things to help overcome the adversity. Yeah.
And that is such a beautiful description. It's really not about fixing anything because we can never bring Robyn back, but it's finding the strength and resilience from those broken places and finding out, I imagine, that you're so much stronger than you really thought you were.
Oh, absolutely.
So can you? So I should tell people how I came across you. I love climbing Munros. I live in Scotland, like yourself, and I came across this group of women called Remembering Robyn, which you are obviously part of, and they climb Munros and they leave little flags which are biodegradable. For anyone starts saying about leaving flags in a place where we shouldn't, and it was to remember Robyn. And then I started to read about her story, and then I watched her videos. I liked your Facebook page, Remembering Robyn. Can you tell us, before we get into what happened on that day, August the 3rd last year, what Robyn was like? Because she, to me, was just this spark of energetic, spontaneous light that, she was just brilliant.
Amazing. Like, I think the best word, like, to describe her, you could say she was like a firework. She was just so bright, so colourful, but had this little spark of sass that, like, when her attitudes come out to play, we used to call her a teenager, because she had the attitudes of a teenager. She was a proper, the kindest little human, and people used to say she had a very old soul. Like, she'd been here. Everyone used to say, she's been here before. She knows too much. She's been here before. And even now, people will tell me little stories I didn't know, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, she was just such an amazing little human that, I don't know, it's so strange to think, like, you just don't think those things would come from a 3-year-old, but obviously she was this little earth angel, as we call her.
She really was. And what was so beautiful, we now live in the age of technology, is you have managed to capture so many videos of her singing and dancing and basically entertaining everyone. She was a real entertainer, wasn't she? Loved to make people happy and
Always,
smile.
always. Yeah, that is one thing that I tell everyone. Like, people always go on about, like, oh, you don't have to have your phone out when you're out, like, keep the pictures in here, but like, take pictures of absolutely everything. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Like, I have pictures of Robyn doing things like sitting eating cereal, or like little stupid things, but like at one point in life that is all you have.
Mhm.
And like family, like we have thousands upon thousands of photos and videos just because everyone was always taking them. And yeah, always singing, always dancing. Even at nursery, you'd go to pick her up and they'd be like, oh, she was showing us her kicks today, or she was showing us how you do the splits. And I was like,
And
she was just always like
she
that.
was great at like freestyle dancing, wasn't she? She just had her own style.
Yeah, so she went to a freestyle dance class, and so she had her little routines, and she used to compete, but she could never ever remember her routines. She'd remember the first maybe 3 things, and then she used to like to just run around the floor and wave at you. She was the only child that would run past waving. And just July last year, we actually managed to get her to remember her full routine. And I was like, I never ever thought that we would get to that place where she just remembered everything and what came next. But I was like, she did it. But yeah, she loved dancing. She took part with all the older children, so all the teenagers. So throughout lockdown, she was taking part in 6 to 7 classes a week, almost every day, plus her 4 private lessons that she did in a week. They used to call her a little machine, little baby boss, because she was the only she was the only one that was quite happy to tell her dance teacher what she thought. Telling her that she was bossy. I'm not sure anyone else would ever say that to her, but Robyn was like, well,
Said it
I
how it
can.
was.
Yeah.
So, can you take us back to that day last year when the accident occurred where she lost her life?
So it was just any normal day. Everything was obviously reopening at the time. Beauty salons and things were getting back to business. And she'd spent a lot of time during summer. We'd been taking her out, and my auntie and cousin's house that she was at that day, they had been taking her out places. And I think that was the last couple of days that they were off work. And we were in the process of decorating our house. So Robyn's dad was going to continue with that. I had a nail appointment. So they were like, just drop her off here in the morning. My auntie's friend is a childminder, and sometimes when Robyn was in the village, my cousin or my auntie would take her to the childminders, and because the little kids that were there were our friends, so they were saying like that they were going up the woods, so they would take Robyn up with them, because there's like a little fairy trail and stuff. So we left at maybe 9:30 in the morning, got to Town Hill just after that. I remember her going into my auntie's and I'd painted her nails, and she's like, look at my nails, and because she loved having them painted. And she had a bubble machine and she was running around trying to find batteries, I think it was, to put in it. And her and my cousin, they were going to have a couple of run throughs of Robyn's dance, because we did that every day just to make sure that she was still remembering. And then they were going to meet the childminder and go up the woods. So I left maybe just before 9:45, maybe round about then. Spoke to my cousin on the phone about, I think we were talking about how to get the music onto her phone for Robyn's dance at 10 to 10. So I would have just got to the car park, started getting my nails done at 10, but by this time they had made the decision. So it was something spontaneous, something that I wasn't aware was happening, but it was just a trip to the shop, which is down the road. And Like, that's something that people do every day when they're looking after your kids, but it's not something that they feel the need to tell you about. So they went to the shop because Robyn loved magazines. She didn't want the magazines, she just wanted all the little tiny toys out the front of it. So my cousin was like, okay, I'll take you to the shop. If you're going to do good with your dancing. She's like, yeah, I'll work hard. So they went and they parked across the road from the shop. They crossed the road and they went in. They had an argument about whether Robyn was going to have this magazine or that magazine, because the other one had like a better toy or something. They went to the till, they paid for it, and then my cousin said to Robyn, oh, are you wanting a sweet? So Robyn went back and got a fudge, I think it was. So that's something that always sticks, because I'm like, maybe if they just hadn't spent that extra couple of minutes, it wouldn't have happened. So they come out the shop, and in front of the shop there used to be 2 parking bays that could fit 4 vehicles in it. So in the front parking bay directly outside the shop, there was a van, like a transit size van, and a 4x4. So when they've come out of the shop, they can be seen on CCTV looking right to check for the cars coming. But because of the van and the 4x4, you can't see anything come down the hill. And the police have also stated that any vehicle coming down there wouldn't be able to see any pedestrian from 100 metres up the road.
And it's quite a notorious bad spot, that corner there, isn't it?
Yeah, so between the parking bays being there and that blocking the sight line, but then also on the other side of the road, people would park on the zigzags. So then what happened was Robyn and my cousin went to walk forward to cross, and they were crossing in front of the van, and Robyn has, because they've not seen anything, no one's told Robyn to stop, because she was always sensible around roads, and if you'd told her to stop and wait, she would stop and wait. So she stepped out. As she stepped out, the car was right there. So the police have said the driver didn't have time to slow down. So that meaning Robyn was hit at, I think it was 29 miles an hour head on.
And people think that's, you know, within the speed limit, but when you're a little 3-year-old girl, 30 miles an hour is still too fast.
And I think as well, I've said for ages, adverts on that used to, I remember the advert that used to be on TV, and it was a little girl lying by the tree, and it used to say, if you hit me at 40 miles per hour, there's a 90% chance that I'll die. But if you hit me at 30 miles per hour, there's a whatever percent chance that I'll live. And I'm like, that advert is very misleading. Because if you're hit at 30 miles per hour head on, like, I've done so much research into it now, and the percent that you will die is very, very high. And for Robyn's age and height, it was, like, it's awful to say, but it was her head and face that took all of the impact. Like, the car took no impact. It was Robyn's head and face. And then when she fell off of the car tires have ran over the top of her body. Because it was so strange to see. Like, all of Robyn's injuries were from here up. Like, I always say to people, from the chest down, she didn't even have a broken finger. She had brand new trainers on that she'd got a couple of weeks before. Not a mark. They were completely, they still look brand new. So after the car hit Robyn, she was carried maybe 5 or 6 meters down the road before she come off of the car. And then
you were
the car ran over her.
to this, weren't you? You were in the nail salon.
Oblivious.
And didn't know anything about it until
No.
police officers came into the salon and asked if you were Danielle Falconer.
So it was maybe 11 o'clock. So this had happened 10 minutes after I'd spoken to my cousin on the phone, because it happened just after 10 a.m. And they didn't come to the nail salon until 11 o'clock. They wouldn't let my cousin phone me, which now I understand why they wouldn't, because of what the scene was. So I had just finished getting my nails done. I was actually getting ready to leave the salon to go, and Robyn was supposed to start school nursery the week later. So I think I was going to go get her like a wee bag for on her peg and stuff to keep her indoor shoes and stuff in. And I was coming down the stairs in the nail salon, 2 police officers walked in, and they obviously asked if I was Danielle, and I said, yeah. And they were like, do you have a little girl called Robyn? I was like, yeah. And they're like, you need to come with us, she's been in a car accident. And I was like, what? Like, I assumed that they were in the car because it was a car accident that they said to me. And I was like, they weren't going anywhere in the car. Like, they were going up the woods, which was right beside my auntie's house. And then obviously they explained that Robyn had been hit by a car and had said that they were blue lighting me to the hospital, but that was all they would say. They wouldn't tell me anything. They just kept saying, she's in the best hands, she's in the best hands. So at that point, I didn't know whether she was awake, whether she was unconscious, or whether she was even alive. They wouldn't tell me anything. And every time I asked them, they just kept saying, she's in the best hands, she's in the best hands. So I had to phone her dad and tell him to go to the hospital. But I didn't have anything else to tell him apart from that she'd been hit by a car. But when you hear that, you never expected it would be as serious as it actually was. So we got there. Robyn's dad was already there and was in a room with, I think it was a paediatric doctor, and I'm not sure who the woman was. And they said, like, they're working on her, but it's just not looking likely. And in your head, if you were to imagine someone saying those words to you, you imagine that you would break down into this massive heap on the floor and you'd be wailing and screaming, and shock just takes over your body. And I was like, had these thoughts going through my head, like, I should be crying, but I can't. Like, I couldn't physically
But it's the
cry.
absolute shock of what you're hearing.
Yes.
It's so hard for your mind to compute something so traumatic. I mean, that is every parent's worst nightmare right there, isn't it?
Yeah. So obviously we hadn't seen Robyn, but Barry was adamant that they were going to let him go round to recess. And they were like, that's not a good idea, blah, blah, blah. But they eventually let him, and he told them to stop because it's like she'd been through enough. So he seen her with like all the tubes and stuff attached to her face, because they'd obviously put a breathing tube in just in case. And he seen she had 3 massive lacerations from here to here across the back of her head. She had a massive one down here. Like, he seen all of that. So that was at 11:20 that they called the time of death. But they'd been working on her from 10 a.m. and had nothing, no response to CPR. They had also at the scene, they had called the helicopter, the air ambulance, because they were hoping that that would take her straight to sick kids. But like, I always think they knew then when they cancelled that like she wasn't going to make it. Because I've heard from people that were there, as soon as that happened, there was police officers just dropping to the ground, like upset. So yeah, 11:20. But since I've spoke to the pathologist, like, he has made it clear that things like CPR and stuff wouldn't have worked with Robyn's injuries because of the part of the brain stem. Robyn had numerous fractures to her skull. Both her jaws were broken, her eye socket was broken. Like, numerous bleeds on the brain, collapsed
Excuse my
lung.
dog, sorry. My co-host.
They called it a laceration in the pons. So that was where most of the impact had happened. And like, after researching that and speaking to the pathologist, life is not sustainable without that part of the brain, because that's
And
where
was
all the
that
signals.
reassuring in one sense to hear actually there was nothing that they could have done? The impact itself was just
Yeah,
took her life away.
because that was always a worry for me, was, is there something that we haven't done, we haven't asked them to do, no one's thought about doing it? Is there something that could have worked? Could we have, I don't know, put her on life support and she would have eventually woke up? Could we have, like, could they have tried CPR for longer? So those were questions that I had to ask the pathologist and have answered.
And I imagine those must be the same questions that go through most parents' minds that have been in that
Yeah,
situation. And it's also part of the acceptance, isn't it? Not wanting to accept what had
absolutely, because
happened.
you want to know that you've done everything that you possibly could for your child to survive that. But the pathologist said there was no way, like, that she would have ever regained consciousness. He said, like, the outcome would have always been fatal. And for me, if we had put her onto life support, it would have just been prolonging that for
Yeah.
us and for her. But I mean, they couldn't get her heart restarted anyway, which he obviously told me CPR would never have done that, because the key part where the signals travel from was damaged. So that was
So
never going to
how
happen.
do you begin to recover from something like this? And you're also at this moment pregnant with your twin boys, aren't you?
Yeah, so we were a week away from finding out the gender, which Robyn would be absolutely fuming about, but
She
I'm
wanted
sure
sisters, did she?
she wanted at least one.
Okay.
One boy and one girl was fine. Two boys, if anyone said that to her, that was not happening. So yeah, very, very, very difficult. And thinking back, people always say that, like, we cope with the situation really well. But I think you're just in so much shock and it just doesn't feel real. And like, people will say to me, if you could use one word to describe this first year, what would it be? And I'm like, shock.
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm in complete shock and exhaustion, because people just don't understand. Like, I always feel like I have to have, Robyn has to be part of every single thought. And that's not healthy for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, like, I see a counsellor and she always says to me, which is totally understandable, like, if Robyn was still here, you would drop her off at places and she wouldn't be part of your every thought. You'd maybe think, I've got to pick her up at 5,
Yeah.
or I've got to take her here at this time, but it wouldn't be every single thought. And you feel this overwhelming guilt if they're not part of every single thought, because you feel like you're forgetting, but you're not.
Yeah.
I think being pregnant with the twins at the time helped just a tiny bit, because I couldn't, like, lie in a dark room all day. I had to get up and I had to eat and I had appointments to go to, and I wanted to be able to get up and sort all this stuff for Robyn so that she had this amazing send off and she had the most magnificent flowers. And for me, I think being able to cope was, her memory needs to live on.
Yeah.
Like, it can't just be
How
that after the
quickly?
funeral, that's it.
Yeah, you started her page remembering Robyn pretty quickly after she passed away, didn't you?
Yeah, so 3 weeks afterwards. And I think that sort of, the idea came from the fact that obviously at the time of Robyn's accident, there was still a lot of restrictions on who was allowed into hospital. So Robyn's dad actually had to tell our family in the car park of the hospital. But they eventually let them in so that they could come in and spend time with Robyn. But they were put into a room that was just a normal hospital room. So it had a bed in it. And things like that. So they had to wait there and come through two at a time to see her. And for me, it was like, I just felt like there needed to be a space, not even just for families, but the nurses and things like that. Because when we leave the hospital, like the nurses and things, they know that we are leaving without the most prized thing in our life. And they absolutely carry a burden that they cannot give your child back to you. And they know that they can't do that, even although they feel that that's part of their job, to be able to save children. To carry the burden that you can't give someone their child back must be absolutely horrendous.
Absolutely.
So I just felt like there needed to be a space with like mindfulness things, and like not even if your child has died, but your child might be in hospital for a long stay and you just need somewhere that you could go that's a nice place that feels a bit more homely, a bit less clinical, just to spend a little bit of time, decompress, gather yourself, and then go back.
So your page isn't just about remembering her, it's about raising money. And amazingly, just a few weeks after you lost your daughter, you're thinking of other people, not just people that may have been in the same situation, but the nurses and the doctors that would have to deal with the stress of this as well. So it must be, I think, hard for people to see how quickly you turned your pain into something positive.
I think I couldn't get myself into that negative mindset. And at the time, I had been open and writing about Robyn's story and how I was feeling at the time, even early on my personal page. I'd been very open about that. So people had said to me, like, you need to start a blog or something that could possibly help someone. So I was like, right, if we're going to be raising money for these other people, that's just a collective place that we can speak about the fundraising that we're doing, and I can tell like little stories about Robyn when memories pop up here and there, and I get videos, like, because lots of Robyn's videos make people laugh. I was like, and it gives me somewhere that I can blog, because I find that helps me writing everything down. And there is a lot of people on Robyn's page. There's a lot of bereaved parents as well. And just to have, like, feel like you have someone else that understands, because you genuinely feel like you're going crazy, like with the stuff that, like maybe some things that you aren't able to do. Like I couldn't go for a food shop for 3 months. And I didn't have to, because I didn't have other children at the time.
And was that because you didn't want to face people and hear their pity,
no,
or you just wasn't physically, mentally able to get yourself there?
More the fact of having to, like, for example, go past certain like aisles or food and not buy them. Like that.
Too many triggers for you.
Yeah, that filled me with this overwhelming anxiety. And I think in your head, imagination creates a massive scenario.
Absolutely.
When reality isn't as bad.
Such an important point that you make there. We really fear something, and sometimes when we do it, it's not as bad as our fears tell us it's going to be, and that happens in every situation.
So I was like, I don't mind explaining these things that you might think are silly, but they are triggers for people, and people do genuinely think they're going crazy because of it, but it's part of the process of grieving. And actually, if that is what is normal in your process, then that is what is normal, and you just have to let yourself go with it. And when you're ready to do those things, then you can do them.
And I know now that the site where she met her death, the notorious blind spot, they've painted a mural, haven't they, in her memory? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So what happened was, at the time of Robyn's accident, the week later, one of Robyn's uncles was walking the West Highland Way with some friends, And some of his friends were doing it for charity, but he was just joining in. And then he had decided that he was going to set up a GoFundMe page and he was going to do it in memory of Robyn. So that got flooded with donations, and Robyn's dance school set up a GoFundMe page too, and that got flooded with donations as well. So we ended up with thousands, and Robyn's dad had said there's another village in Fife that there's a few murals in it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are just random things, but Robyn's dad had said about getting one put on the side of the building because there was people there that day that have to pass that site every single day in life, and like I couldn't imagine having to walk past there and see that happen every day. So we wanted to create a better picture and a better memory. So that was the whole idea behind it. So we thought, we've got obviously the GoFundMe money that was for the family, so why don't we use it to put one of them up as well as for Robyn's memorial? So we obviously contacted the person that painted them, and she put the picture of Robyn that's up there isn't actually a picture that we have in person, because the dance costume that she's wearing in it, she never got the chance to wear. That was made after her accident. So the artist has taken her nursery picture, because that's everyone's favourite picture of her. But she, in one of her photos, she has these bows that flash, and they were her favourite thing. Anytime she had them in, they had to be flashing the whole day long. So she's taken them out of another picture and put them in. And then obviously put the dance costume on. And a family friend had written a poem about Robyn, so that's the words that are up there as that poem.
And how do you cope? Because on the whole, I know social media has been really positive, but you do get some negative responses as well. Excuse me.
I always find it very difficult not to, because I don't have to justify our situation to anyone. I don't have to explain it, but I feel like I do when I see those negative comments. And I know people are always going to have their own opinions of things and their own judgments, and they're going to take parts of a story that they hear and they're going to run with that. And that's fine, because everyone's allowed their own opinion. However, there's just some opinions that maybe don't have to be said. And you'll put these posts on social media and you'll see there's thousands of people that are always supportive, but that's never the comments that you remember. There could be one negative comment in that, and that is the one that you will see first, and that is the one that will stick out to you. And I always just remind myself that actually Robyn was a good person, we're good people doing what we're doing, and if you have your opinions, that's fine, and you can believe that if you want. But for me, I don't know, I just constantly feel like I have to justify the fact of what actually happened, and I have to make sure that they know that they're wrong.
And there's no justification. Well, so you started by saying there's no justification needed, and yet you always feel that you need to, because it's a personal attack when you put yourself out there publicly, and especially if the attacks are against your cousin who is with her on that day. It's very difficult to hear people, but I often think people that can't accept things for how they are, they retaliate with anger or with hurt. So it says a lot about where they're at rather than where you're at.
I think though they forget, or I think people assume that, like, I know that my cousin made mistakes that day, and she knows that she made mistakes that day, and we have to live with them, and she has to live with that. But I think people assume that we're painting this picture that she did everything correct, and that's not the case. Like, we've always been open about the fact that she didn't take Robyn's hand, and she should have, 100% she should have, and she knows that. And I feel like when people say things about it, I'm like, but I just have to justify that actually we've never said that that didn't happen. Like, we've never said that she had Robyn's hand, because we know she didn't, and obviously she should have. But for me, being a parent, I'm like, it's hard enough to live with that every day and think, maybe I should have just reminded her to do that. But then you think in your head, well, you wouldn't normally feel like you had to remind someone to take their hand. But I'm like, people, like when people make comments, I'm like, it just adds to what you're already feeling.
And as you
which
say,
is unnecessary.
her journey with this must be so challenging for her personally. I can't imagine it's going to be easy for her.
No, not in a long shot. And I'm like, it's hard enough for me to see those comments, and I wasn't the one that was there with Robyn that day. So to be the person that had her that day, like, you already live with the fact that you are the person that was last with her. So it's your actions, like one small thing you did could have changed the outcome. So I think living with that without negative comments is hard enough.
Absolutely. So it feels like now you are creating a living legacy for Robyn in her name. She will always be Forever 3, as we said at the start,
Yeah.
but everything is in her name, and it keeps her so much alive, really, doesn't it?
Yes, for me, that is a massive thing. Her memory continuing and her legacy continuing. So we've obviously, the start of our fundraising was for the hospital room, which we're keeping money set aside for. But we have a few other ideas in the pipeline. Like, I really wanted to, when your child passes, you get beautiful memory boxes from the hospital with like their handprint and a lock of their hair and things. But then you're just left to leave, and it's like, wow, how am I ever going to cope? How am I ever going to get through this? So we come up with the idea of healing hands or helping hands, just from one parent to another, to say, yeah, this is going to be the most difficult time of your life, but you're going to get there, and here's some things that helped us. For example, you don't want to cook, so Just Eat vouchers, things like, I find journaling really helpful. So little grief journals, or I read quite a lot of books now about like the afterlife and reincarnation and all of this. So things like that they might not want to look at to begin with, but maybe weeks or months down the line, they might think, actually, that could be helpful.
It's as if you want to wrap your arms around all the other parents after you that are going to lose their babies.
We also,
and that says an awful lot about you and your beautiful big heart, really, doesn't it?
I know. I hope so, anyway. And then the other thought was, Robyn was very fortunate and had lots and lots of opportunities that some people don't get in their full adult lifetime, never mind in 3 years. So we were able to send Robyn to private nursery, and because that's not cheap either. And we were able to send Robyn to all the dance classes and send her to competitions and stuff. There's some kids that just don't have that. So we wanted to provide, pay for one child to go to private nursery 2 days a week. So that's one of the scholarships that we're going to set up. And we're going to work with the nursery and find a child who maybe it'll help their parent go to work for 2 days and just build up some extra money and things like that. And we're going to do 2 dance scholarships a year for children to attend so many classes and private lessons a week that Robyn obviously had the chance to do. So that's where things are starting. We also have another few ideas about, we want to set up something called Robyn's Reach, just for maybe vulnerable families, because it's all about making memories. Materialistic things they don't matter, but some people can't afford to do things like going to the safari park or the zoo, and it's just little things like that that we want to be able to send people to these places so that children have these memories and parents have been able to create them with their children.
I think it is just, it's just so many emotions when I listen to you, Danielle. It's heartbreaking, but it's just beautiful and heartwarming what you are doing now for other parents and other families. So it really just leaves me to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And I will put all the links in our show notes if people want to go on to Remembering Robyn Facebook page, or even to leave some money on the Just Giving page. I'll put all that in the post. But thank you so much for all that you're doing. You truly are inspirational.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope I do inspire.
You absolutely do.
Unbroken, healing through storytelling.